Mark Kermode, thank you for joining us at Curzon Mayfair today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here to celebrate the 90th birthday anniversary of Curzon and Curzon Mayfair.
Yes, 90th is astonishing, isn't it? It's like, it's because I remember going to the Curzon, when I was in Manchester in the 1980s. So before I went to Manchester, and then when I came back, and going to Curzon cinemas, I'm now 62. So the idea that Curzon are still 30 years older than me is immensely reassuring.
What are some of your favourite memories that you've had in a Curzon cinema throughout the years?
Just recently, weirdly enough, I saw this very, very powerful film called My Favourite Cake, right? And I went to a screening of it at the Curzon in Soho. And I sat at the very, very back. A friend of mine, Linda Marrick, had told me that she really liked the film, but she hadn't said anything about it. And I'd seen a couple of people describe it as a comedy. Anyway, I started watching it, and it's not a comedy. It's a really, really powerful drama. It has comedic elements, but it's a story about this really lonely woman living in a very repressive society who sort of stumbles into this completely unexpected relationship with this older man. And so it's an older man and an older woman. And I was watching the film, and I was completely enraptured by it. And I found myself, and there weren't many people in the screen, it was very early in the day, and I found myself actually saying out loud, don't let anything bad happen to them. Don't let anything bad happen to them. And I was, like I said, I was right at the back, so I was kind of doing it under my breath. This is how much I was. Of course, the film didn't listen to me, and the film did what the film needed to do. But I remember thinking it was a really profound experience because it wasn't to do with the fact that there was loads of other people in the cinema. There weren't loads of other people in the cinema, but it was the fact that I was in the cinema. I knew that had I been watching it at home, or had I been watching it, on a streaming link or something, I don't think I would have had the same reaction to it. And I was literally, I know this sounds stupid and it sounds like I'm making up, I promise you this is true. I literally had to sort of put my fist over my mouth to stop myself saying out loud, don't let anything bad happen to them. And I was really glad that I was right at the back, because there was people like, sort of 10, 15 rows ahead. And if I hadn't, they would have heard me. And I was really struck by how that had to do with the cinema experience. The film is wonderful. It's really, really profound, very moving, and it does what the film needs to do. But it was just made better by the experience of being in the cinema. And I was thinking, I am pretty certain, I may be wrong because my memory fails me quite a lot nowadays. I'm pretty certain I saw The Cook the Thief in the Curzon Soho. And I remember that because I remember people walking out. I remember people going, this is disgusting and disgraceful, and thinking, you haven't seen Cannibal Holocaust, have you? That's disgusting and disgraceful. But it was something really exciting about being in a cinema when people were annoyed enough to walk out of film. So it's two completely separate sort of experiences, but both amplified by the fact that you're actually in a cinema.
Well, so you are presenting a screening of 2001: A Space Odyssey as part of the ongoing celebrations for Curzon's 90th. We're going to get into 2001 in a lot of detail, but what do you think, for you, what about it feels like very important to watch in a cinema, that film in particular?
Well, I can tell you exactly. So I was born 63. I saw 2001 when I was 11. And I saw it at what is now the Phoenix in East Finchley. And I saw it very specifically because I had been to see a film called Silent Running, which was made by Doug Trumbull, who worked on 2001. And they were reissuing 2001 in the wake of Silent Running. And I saw the trailer for 2001, and I remember really, really clearly the image of the astronaut squirreling in space in silence, and I was really transfixed by it. And I said to the parents of my friend who had taken us to see Silent Running, can we go and see 2001? And my friend's mother said, you won't understand it. And I said, that's okay. She said, no, it's very, very, and she used a word I hadn't heard before. She said, it's very symbolic. And me and Mark, my friend, went, what does that mean? I've got no idea. And then we went to the cinema to see 2001. And I remember us both sitting there watching the film, being overwhelmed by the visuals of it. Probably having no real idea what was going on, but being very, very sort of overwhelmed by it. And it had a really profound effect on me because I went home and, so I said, I'm now in my early 60s and I've written quite a few books. The first book I ever wrote was a novelisation of 2001 that I wrote at the age of 11, attempting to make sense of the film that I had seen. I didn't know there was a novel at that point. And then, of course, later on I read Arthur C. Clarke's novel, which was written at the same time as the screenplay. It's not adapted from the novel. And then I read that, and that kind of makes sense of the film. It's much more kind of, it's much more literal. But that's what I remember really clearly, me and my friend Mark sitting, watching this film that we had been told by his parents we were not going to understand, and thinking it doesn't matter. It's just the experience of the visuals was so, there's very little dialogue in it anyway, but just the experience of watching it. And I remember being completely transfixed and completely baffled. And literally, I'm not making this up. I've still got a copy of the thing that I wrote. It's 11 pages long. It makes no sense. But it's like an 11-year-old trying to make sense of the thing they've seen. And obviously, since then, I've seen it many, many, many times. And I've always been drawn back to that first experience of seeing it. And, just me and Mark going, like, literally slack-jawed with amazement.
How does it make you feel to know that that phenomenon is still happening today with a lot of younger generations who are at film school or even just obsessed with movies, who are, rediscovering 2001 as part of their curriculum and are saying it's one of their favourite films? It just keeps getting better with age, it seems.
The thing about it is it's not even that it keeps getting better, it's that it is an enigma. It is a very, very enigmatic film. Some people find it infuriating because it doesn't make any sense. What happens at the end? It doesn't explain itself. But because for one thing, because of the way that the effects were done, they're done in camera, they're physical effects. The effects have aged really, really well. Arthur C. Clarke very much had it in mind to make something that was a very realistic portrait of where he predicted society would be, in the year 2001. But the visual effects it was really to do with, like building great big rotating rotunda sets in order to do the anti-gravity stuff, having people on wires, the incredible stuff that Doug Trumbull does with the Stargate. Those effects have aged brilliantly. And I also think there's something timeless about it because it does so little explaining. Because there are very few moments in it in which the plot is explained to you, and when they are explained, it's explained quite insufficiently. So it's really a film that every new audience, people think they know 2001 because maybe they've seen the poster, and the poster is, the round satellite and what looks like a spaceship shooting out of it. That never happens in the film. The spaceship very, very quietly comes into there's no noise in space, and so you think it's going to be a space adventure, and it's really not. It's a much kind of more complex meditation on things that happens to play out in outer space. And I think it's like, and I've gone 10 minutes without saying The Exorcist. It's like a film like The Exorcist. It won't age because of the way it was made, because it was very, very physical, because a lot of it was done in camera, and because everyone takes away from it what they bring to it. I think that's why it has longevity.
Well, you mentioned The Exorcist.
Sorry.
No.
No, I am sorry.
Never any apologies needed. It is obviously a film that's very dear to you and has been so important to your career. So let's talk about your career just for a minute, because we are here to celebrate the last 90 years of cinema and the film industry, of which you play such an enormous part. So when you were first falling in love with film, watching 2001 at the age of 11, did you always want to write? Was film criticism always going to be your path?
What it was when I was a kid going to the movies in the 70s, firstly there was 4 or 5 cinemas within cycling or one bus ride distance or walking distance from my house. There was a lot of cinemas around. So I would go to the cinema pretty much every weekend. So films used to change over on a Sunday then, so you could see a film on a Saturday and go to the same cinema and see a different film on a Sunday. And it's what I did. I didn't really have, I'm not complaining about this, I didn't really have friends, I didn't do sport, I didn't go to parties, I didn't do any of that. I just went to the cinema. And I remember very, very early on, the first film that I remember seeing at the cinema, my mum took me to see Krakatoa East of Java, which is, it's probably not a classic film, but as a kid, I was complete, it's got like, airships and volcanoes and, and boats and stuff and a musical number and all this. And I remember literally thinking, I just want to live here. I don't want to go. I just want to stay here. And I remember that thing about, I'd get a bus to, the Classic in Hendon or the Barnet Odeon or the Phoenix or any of those things. And it was almost like a portal. I mean, to use a kind of 2001 analogy, it was like a kind of Stargate. You'd go in and then the film would transport you to somewhere else. And also when I was young, there was quite a lot of reruns. So I saw Ben-Hur, you know, in a rerun, and I was just amazed because it was like, you know, have you ever seen Ben-Hur on a big screen? It's really big. And the James Bond movies would all be rerun, and all the James Bond movies, at the beginning of it, he'd go to a foreign country, he'd go to somewhere you couldn't imagine. And so it was literally like a portal that would take you to other places. I remember that really clearly. But also back then there wasn't video. So if you saw a film and you liked it and you wanted to see it again, you had to wait until it came round again. What you could do is you could buy a soundtrack album, and that would often kind of, you know, cue memories. But the main thing you could do is I would write down my memories of the film, not for, you know, but for my own purposes. So then I could listen to the soundtrack album, or in the case of 2001, my novelization. And it was a way of revisiting the film, that you'd play the soundtrack album, you'd have you know, stills on the back of it, and you'd read your own notes about what you'd written. So by the time I went to Manchester in '82 and I started working at City Life magazine as a film critic, I'd sort of been writing down what I thought about films for the, you know, for best part of a decade. That was really where it came from. It never occurred to me that you could make a living out of it. I remember watching Barry Norman on the television and thinking, firstly, he's brilliant. Secondly, that's the most amazing job. I don't know how anyone does that. But the writing it down preceded and I think you'll find that with a lot of film critics. I'm sure that Kim Newman did that because, you know, just because his knowledge is so encyclopedic, and so that was it. So yeah, you'd come out, I had a little notebook, I had a selection of notebooks, and I would just write down, you know, what I thought and what happened and where I saw it. It's, you know, that's how I'd relive cinema.
Is that a habit that you've kept today for films when you might not be reviewing every single film, right? But when you are discovering films or just going to cinema by yourself, how do you keep track of your thoughts and feelings? Do you still feel that need today?
I mean, if I'm seeing films professionally to review, I tend to make notes, which I think, you know, a lot of critics do. If I'm just going to the cinema for my own entertainment, then no, I won't do that. But I have a pretty good recall of where I saw most stuff. I mean, as I said, that's why I think I may be wrong about The Cook, the Thief, which would have completely undercut all of that. But generally, you know, I can tell you, you know, I saw The Exorcist for the first time at the Phoenix. I saw The Sting for the first time at the Classic in Hendon. I saw, you know, I mean, I can tell you which cinema. I saw Planet of the Apes in the Barnet Odeon. I saw Battle for the Planet of the Apes in the Barnet Odeon. I can tell you where I saw the films because I can remember being in the auditorium, and that just kind of sticks. I mean, I can't remember what day of the week it is, and I'll go down to the shops and can't remember what I was getting, but I can tell you where I saw Battle for the Planet of the Apes.
Yeah, I mean, we've already covered some incredible films that have made up your film history and how you've come to it. Curzon is screening a lot of important and influential films for the ongoing celebration of the 90th anniversary. If you could add a film to screen as part of the celebration, what would you add? So some films we've got are Paris, Texas, An Angel at My Table, The 400 Blows.
Got Raw. Which is absolutely brilliant. You've got Parasite, which is absolutely brilliant. You've got You Were Never Really Here, which is absolutely brilliant. I'm afraid the film that I would add, and this is weird because this is kind of like the other half of the 2001 double bill, is Silent Running. Silent Running had an incredibly profound effect on me. So Silent Running is directed by Doug Trumbull, who didn't, you know, he only directed a couple of features, and he worked very intensely with Kubrick on 2001. And at the end of 2001, he made Silent Running in response to it, because he said he had spent the last few years of his life making a film in which the most sympathetic character is a computer that tries to kill everyone. And he wanted to make a film which was sentimental and had, you know, sort of human beings in it. And actually, the two films are a perfect companion piece. On the one hand, you know, 2001 is very austere, it's very Kubrick, it's very, very, you know, it's not a film in which it has warm human characters. And Silent Running, which incidentally makes no sense at all, is really sentimental and really sweet and has these lovely songs by Joan Baez. And so I think the two are a pair, and I love both of them. I mean, Silent Running was my gateway to 2001, so I would say that's the thing that's missing.
Throughout your career, you have spoken to so many filmmakers as well as all of the reviews that you've written. If we're thinking in terms of the realm of 90 years of something, who is a filmmaker before your time working in the film industry that you wish you could have interviewed, and what would you ask them?
The first thing I'll say is, quite often interviewing filmmakers is not necessarily the best way of understanding their films. I once had an exchange with somebody. They weren't the director, somebody who was in a film. And I said, I think the film is about this. And they said, no, it isn't about this, it's about this. And I said, well, I disagree. And he said, well, I was in the film. And I said, yeah, but I saw it. And this was it was a stupid point. But I became, as you may know, quite good friends with William Friedkin, who I had many disagreements with Friedkin about, what his films meant and, and what his films were about. Of course, everybody would love to have sat down with Orson Welles, or everybody would love to have sat down with, Alfred Hitchcock or, Maya Deren or something. But I am bizarrely of the opinion that in the end, the film speaks for itself. The person I was really proud to know was Ken Russell. And, I worked on a couple of documentaries about Ken's work. And I think that I'm really, really proud that I got to know him, because I think he was an absolute genius. I wish I'd met Powell and Pressburger. But then I've just watched the new documentary about them, and you kind of feel like you are meeting them because it's such a brilliant piece of work. But imagine what that would be like to sit down with Powell and Pressburger and go, have you got 5 hours free? I've got a couple of questions.
There would never be enough time with them at all. So are filmmakers working today whose films you may or may not have reviewed or may be seeing for fun, who really excites you in the film industry, and who do you think or hope that we might be talking about, in another 90 years from now?
I love Lynn Ramsey's films. I think she's brilliant. I love Julia Ducournau's films. I think she's fantastic. I just saw The Substance, the Coralie Fajar film, which I thought was absolutely mind-blowing, and I really enjoyed that. And it's funny, people talk about that being Cronenbergian, but it's kind of more Brandon Cronenbergian than it is David Cronenbergian. I'm a big fan of Carol Morley, who I think has done some really, really interesting work. When she made I Love the Falling, and I actually loved Out of Blue, which is a film that didn't get appreciated in the way it should have done. And then she made, Typist Artist Pirate King, and it was a very little movie that I think it's now on Netflix, but she's always doing really, really, really interesting stuff. Dion Edwards, who made Pretty Red Dress, I think is great, and I absolutely loved that movie. So there's plenty. With Peter Strickland, who of course I saw an interview with on in Curzon. There's so many filmmakers who are exciting at the moment. When I first saw St. Maud, I saw it at the distributors, and I saw it in a cinema on my own. Because the end of it is so incredibly powerful, which they worked a long time to get exactly the right amount of that last frame. And I walked out of the screening, and I didn't know that anyone was going to be outside, and the distributors were sitting around a table, and I just looked at them, and they looked at me, and I went, bloody hell. And I think they thought that I meant badly, but I meant, in a really good way. And I had exactly the same thing coming out of Love Lies Bleeding. I thought the end of Love Lies Bleeding was really audacious. Really fantastically audacious. And I think, and I have had the privilege of interviewing her a few times, and she's a real force of nature.
Yeah. I think my review of Julia Ducournau's Titane was just Jesus Christ. And I never really wanted to explain to anyone what I meant by it, but I think you just know.
But Raw is so brilliant, and the kind of thing with Raw is, where do you go from here? And when Titane got the success that it did in Cannes, it sort of felt like payback for David Cronenberg's Crash, being famously snubbed because the president of the jury, took against it. So that was really good. And also, you just thought the confidence of it, the confidence of that film, it's so, muscular and I'm a big fan of Catherine Bigelow as well. And I know Catherine Bigelow's working on a new project now, and I just saw Point Break again just recently. And, Point Break is one of the greatest movies ever made.
We've covered so many fantastic movies and films that we've all seen in all of these amazing brick and mortar places that we've been through. Because we're talking about the physical element of seeing films in cinemas, let's talk about the physical nature of film, by which I mean, are you much of a collector in terms of movie merch, obviously physical media, and do you keep tickets?
I have got an attic full of what is probably best described as clutter, which I am trying to organise and hive off to museums to take anything that's valuable. So I have very good links with the Bill Douglas Cinema Museum in Exeter, which is just a world-class cinema museum, and I've been giving some stuff to them. I have obviously a ludicrous archive of Exorcist stuff, including the editor's cutting script, and stuff that really shouldn't be in my attic. It really should be somewhere to be preserved. I don't keep tickets. No, I've got my notebooks. I've still got them. I've got my soundtrack album collection, and I've got an Exotica t-shirt that I still wear now from a film in the 90s. And that t-shirt is like 30 years old, and it's absolutely the best made promotional t-shirt I've ever come across. It is indestructible. It must be made of kryptonite. I mean, it's absolutely fantastic. But so, yeah, I've just recently cleared out some DVDs because there wasn't any space for them. I've still got, because of the age I am, I've still got a pretty good run of video nasties on VHS, which I'll never play because I don't have a VHS recorder anymore. But it's like, you kind of get really attached to that copy of Driller Killer. You don't really feel that you could part with it, so it's just like the artifact.
Yeah. What is one piece of memorabilia that's in the attic that you should give to a museum, but you will never be able to bring yourself to part with it? That's not the t-shirt.
I mean, I should give a museum the editor's cutting script for The Exorcist. I've also got, I've got a call sheet from the very last day of The Exorcist. I've got a poster for The Exorcist that's signed by pretty much all the main players, because when we did The Fear of God, it was sort of like the last time that everyone was still around, and I will have to get rid of that stuff, but I just don't want to because it's mine.
Why should you have to?
Because it deserves to be somewhere, sensible. Because at some point down the line, somebody's going to wonder whether, at one point I was working with William Peter Blatty on drafts of his screenplay for Legion, which was being published by Faber. And I've got a whole box of different drafts of the Legion Exorcist 3, Exorcist 1990 scripts. They're in my attic. They shouldn't be there. They should be in an archive.
What is a film that you love that you don't currently own in a physical media format that you're really on the hunt for?
I was going to say Breathless, but I do own Breathless. And in fact, I'm on the disc of Breathless, the Richard Gere Breathless, which incidentally is that I don't know that there's anything that for a long time the answer to that question was Jeremy, which is a film, just a brilliant, beautiful love story, and it was released in the UK. It was released as a B feature with Breakheart Pass. I saw it at the Barnet Odeon, and since you asked, and for ages that film was completely unavailable. You couldn't get it anywhere, and then a couple of years ago it was released on disc by a label in America. And I was all set to do an interview with Robbie Benson about it for the disc, and then COVID happened and it didn't happen, but they did send me a disc of the film. So then they sent me a disc and I said, can I have another one for safekeeping? And they went, why? I said, well, in case one of them fails. And then somebody else bought me a copy of it because they knew I'd been on the search for it. I've now got 5 discs of it. So yeah, no, that was the last piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. Or maybe a film for which you do own a disc, and you don't have to name names, but one that you think deserves a nicer version. Do you know what I mean? A better design, a restoration, something that could bring it back up again and that folks could seek out to collect.
Well, there is, I'm sorry, I just sound like a stuck record. There is a partial reconstruction of William Peter Blatty's Exorcist 3, which should have been called Legion, which I was sort of peripherally involved in doing, and the proper takes for that film are in a vault somewhere and no one can find them. It's like The Wicker Man, they couldn't find the 35mm elements. They are somewhere, but they've been lost, and we did a kind of partial reconstruction of what the film should have looked like, but the company that did it in America did a brilliant job, but they ended up working from VHS stuff and from working prints. Somewhere all the proper 35mm elements for that exist, and wouldn't that be amazing if that could be found? But I don't know. I mean, I do appreciate that the number of people who are sitting awake at night worrying about the fact that we don't have a fully intact version of Legion Exorcist 3 is probably quite small.
Well, one title that I'm particularly interested to know what you have in terms of the physical media space. Mary Poppins.
Well, I've got a book that was signed by Julie Andrews. I've got an original, well, I've got a VHS of it, obviously. I've got an original flipper disc, which literally, you're probably too young to remember these. When DVDs first started, right, they would play for a certain amount of time and then they would stop and you'd have to flip them over. And literally in Mary Poppins, when there's the bit which says, Michael, stop stravaging, in my mind, the film stops because you have to get up and go thing and then turn the thing over before they can have the tea party on the ceiling. And it doesn't matter how many times I watch Mary Poppins, that doesn't happen every single time we get to that moment, because that flipper disc I watched, I'm not exaggerating, I probably watched it 100 times. You know, I had young kids and they loved the film as much as I did. And every time it was one of those things, if you keep watching a film again and again and again, it starts to become really like mesmeric. And I had watched Mary Poppins so many times, but that flipper disc is still the one that I would go back to, because as far as I'm concerned, Michael, stop stravaging should be followed by a thing. And it's literally, it's a hand. The hand comes on and says, turn the disc over, turn the disc over. Yeah. Very, 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 very old school.
We've covered so many great films, and now I want to see Mary Poppins at cinema, but with an interval.
Yeah.
But to round things off.
Yes.
When you're watching 2001.
2001. Let's just get this right. Okay, fine. So you say 2001, right? And I say 2000.
We've made it this far.
No, we've made it this far without getting. But I contest, and I may be wrong, right? I contest that 2001 is the American version and 2001 is the English version.
I believe it.
And I think it's 2001, but you know, sorry.
No, I appreciate it, and it's important for everyone to know this, starting with me.
Thank you for being so tolerant, I'm sorry.
Of course, so when we are watching that film,
yes.
at Curzon, Mayfair or anywhere else, any other cinema around the world, what's your favourite seat to sit in?
Well, I always sit on the last aisle seat on the left. That's just me. That's what I always do.
Where, as in last at the back?
Yeah, so if we're in this cinema, that one there, last aisle seat on the left.
Okay.
And that's a thing. I have to do that, you know.
Well, it's important. Now we know, we will save that seat and see you at the cinema for 2001.
Thank you for having me.